Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more about Ham's bloodline and the curse that was put on Ham and Canaan, one of his sons. So let's have a look at the first slide here. Now there's a question I'm going to try and answer, or two questions I'm going to answer. How did the giants survive the flood, and why? Now, we know that in Genesis 6 it says that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterwards. Indication definitely after the flood. Now, this is just my opinion. It's not scripturally confirmed or anything like that, but for how the giants survived, I believe it's genetic predisposition. You can Google that up if you don't know what it means. And but basically, in my opinion, it was delivered via the blood, the genetics of a certain individual, who I believe would have been Ham's wife. But I'll elaborate a bit more on that shortly. The why, I don't know. Yahweh doesn't say, it's not mentioned anywhere in scripture, the reason why it was allowed, but I've formed an opinion that could it be a choice situation, a free will choice that was made, or another way of explaining it, deception. Ham may have been deceived leading up to the flood, and why it was allowed to happen could have been because of free will, the choice, or another reason why Yahweh let this happen could be something to do with glorifying his name, which would later appear by conquering over the descendants of all these giants later on, with all the covenants that get rolled out. In a sense, it's sort of like continuing the wicked to bring about further glory to his name. Okay, so let's have a look now at the curse and when it was applied. Now there's a few details in here I want to highlight and bring to your attention. The first thing is that Noah had become drunk and was asleep, and Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, etc., 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 told his brothers. The brothers came in and covered him up. And when Noah woke up, he knew, he instinctively knew somehow that it was his youngest son, Ham. Okay? Now that's an important point. How did he know that Ham was the culprit? Okay? Maybe Ham was already rebelling or showing signs of disobedience. Notice also the curse wasn't delivered directly to Ham. It skipped Ham and went to Canaan. So why Canaan? Ham had other sons, three other sons, and the curse fell upon Canaan. Why? This is what interests me, and this is how I form my opinion. The curse was on Canaan because when we look at the family tree of Ham, Canaan appears to be the only son that all the descendants of the giants came from. To my knowledge, there was no other giants from the other sons. So the question is, why the curse on Canaan? Could it be that Canaan himself, as a young adult at the time possibly, was developing the signs of extreme height, like a giant? And not only was Ham possibly a rebel, he may have been a rebel from the beginning, before the flood, in secret. He may have been deceived after the flood, we don't know. This is just my opinions and my guesswork here, that Ham's wife may have had the Nephilim genetics in her blood, and either it was kept from Ham's knowledge, or Ham knew about it, and a deception that was allowed to happen in order to continue this generation of rebellion after the flood. Notice the other sons of Ham were also known for their rebellion. You've got Cush, father Nimrod. Nimrod is described as someone who became mighty, a mighty one, which is a reference to the status of a giant, but that could be taken out of context. He could have just been simply the first man to build a city, whereas the giants would have had their own cities later down the track. And then you've got Egypt, who fathered the Philistines. The Philistines enslaved Israel and all the tribes. And you've also got the Sodom and Gomorrah was also in reach of the Canaanites, and there was a separate judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah as well. So this is very, very interesting. Ham's descendants of rebellion, and that's what leads me to form that opinion. Now, also what I want to talk about in this presentation is a little bit more on the giants themselves, a little bit more specific. The previous presentation I didn't quite cover their full characters and their heights, etc. So let's have a closer look now at the giants mentioned in the Old Testament. The first reference here, which I showed in the previous slides, that the men view themselves as grasshoppers compared to the Amorites. We got this verse later on in the book of Amos, and it refers to the Amorites as being as high as cedar trees. Okay, and cedar trees are massive. You can't quite take that as a legitimate reference. Obviously, a cedar tree would be massive, probably in the excess of 70 meters tall, something like that. So that's pretty unbelievable to think that any giant would be literally as tall as a tree, but a strong indication there of extreme height nonetheless. Now we're getting into the specifics. King Og. King Og, who was killed by Moses, his height, or his bed, was measured 4.1 meters long by 1.8 meters wide. That's pretty significant. Made of iron. Quite the comfortable bed to be sleeping on. And then we have Goliath. Now we all know about Goliath from the location Gath, and he measured 2.97 meters tall. His coat of armor weighed 57 kilos in bronze, and his weapon of choice was a spear, and just the head of the spear weighed just under 7 kilos, not including the actual spear itself, just the head. Now I've also got down the bottom there a quotation of this Jew fellow here. I can't pronounce his name. He's highlighted in purple there, who in the year of 200 AD did a translation from Hebrew Old Testament to Greek language, and this is the oldest translation I could find that actually refers to Goliath being 6 cubits and 1 span. Now, there are other translations out there that say a different height, but I go with this one because it's the oldest one, the oldest reference being 200 AD, so I don't have a problem with that. Here's another giant character, and don't need to say much about him. It's just, carrying around another weapon of choice, a spear weighing 3.5 kilos. And 3.5 kilos, if someone like us, a normal man, tried to throw that, I'd imagine the distance of that sphere would only travel maybe 5 meters, if that. Give it a good run up and a bit of effort, maybe 5 to 10 meters. So that's not going to be an effective weapon for a normal man, but for a giant, 3.5 kilos, it would be nothing, and the effective range of a sphere for hunting would need to be thrown 35 to 50 meters. Now we have another description here of a descendant from the Gath area, 6 fingers, 6 toes, and all of the above giants mentioned in the Gath location with the Philistine army, they all fell by the hands of David and his servants, also by the strength of the Lord. Now here is just a bit of a victory overall that I want to show you here, that Moses had victory over the land of Anak, and the sons of Anak, that they thought they were grasshoppers in comparison. In the book of Joshua 11, it mentions that none of their Anaks were left behind, only Gaza and Gath and Ashdod did some remain. And that is where Goliath and those other 4 giants came from, and they all fell by David. Okay, so I want to finish up now on a separate point. There's a couple of things here. One, the earth was full of corruption, full of violence, corruption in all flesh. Now, I find that fascinating because violence, which is an indication of war, or ongoing war, ongoing murder, but you've also got Noah, not in confliction, and are able to build an ark over many years. There's a lot of study done on it that say, it could have been 50 years building the ark before the flood came, and that's a long time. And you'd think that, an earth that's full of violence would impede Noah's location. But if we go to the New Testament now, have a look at what Jesus says. He says, in reference to his second coming, will be like the days of Noah. Okay. And notice here, before the flood, the people of the time were eating, drinking, marrying, and giving marriages. Now that is not violence, that is not war. That is an indication that there were people They're unrighteous people, because they didn't board the ark, that were separate to the violence, separate to the war, very similar to today's time. There are countries of war and violence ongoing, and there are also locations of the world now that are at peace, and that they were also completely unaware that the flood was coming. Now, it could just be that they were simply not given the time. Noah's family didn't know when the flood was going to come. It could just simply mean that. But to be completely unaware that the flood was coming over 50 years or possibly more of building the ark, it just begs the question that maybe there wasn't that much information let out from the community that they're in. Certainly not to the ones in war, and the ones in with violence, giants and the humans, the wicked ones, and that they just had no idea. And also the unrighteous ones in their community, they would have seen the ark being built, and so they wouldn't be unaware of what's going on, but just unaware of the day. So there's a couple of things in that to parallel just the two timings from before the flood and before the second coming. There seems to be three groups. There's the righteous one, Noah and his family. You've got the church today, the righteous ones, and then you've got the ones at peace, which would be the Westerners, Western cultures, the ones that are not in war, just going about their everyday businesses, just like before the flood, drinking and marrying. And then you've got the ones in violence and in war. There's three groups, three parallels, and I find that that very interesting, because we're seeing end time signs all the time now happening, and the world is just so asleep to it. So, we don't know the exact time when the second coming, just like they didn't know when the flood was going to happen, but we know what to look for. Okay, so that's all I'm going to talk about in this video. So, in closing to this video presentation, just be aware of what's going on in the world today, that you're prepared for the flood that's about to come and annihilate the whole world via the second coming of the Messiah. He's going to come to separate the righteous from the unrighteous, and it's going to be, as the Bible indicates in the book of Revelations, the worst judgments ever delivered to the earth. So definitely you do not want to be on the bad watch of the Messiah. It's better to be on his friends list than to be on his enemies list. And all you have to do is have faith in who he is, what he did, why he came to earth, and live for his example. It is a very simple request when you think about it. Do good. Do good that's biblically defined, and have faith in the Messiah. That will get you there. That will get you there. I think my next video is going to be covering what it actually means to be born again. As always, God bless.